This man is 𝐓𝐡𝐢. He used to be an athlete who held the title of Asian champion, but because he had a fight with his coach and went to prison, his career was ruined. At the age of 43, in order to survive, he opened a sand mining business that night while delivering sand, whose truck was blocked by a stone trap because he realized that there were robbers. He prepared to defend himself. But when the robbers appeared, it turned out that they were all children who couldn't stop them all. And suddenly he was hit in the head with a rock and fainted. The next day, after being treated in the hospital, his friend and project manager 𝐓𝐡𝐢 met him and said that employees went on strike because their salaries had not been paid for 6 months. Lately, they rarely got orders, and if this continued, they could go bankrupt. Hearing that in order to save his business, 𝐓𝐡𝐢 planned to go to his old friend 𝐓𝐡𝐢, who was a successful businessman, to borrow some money. When they met, 𝐓𝐡𝐢 talked about his business problems. 𝐓𝐡𝐢 said that he could lend him some money as long as 𝐓𝐡𝐢 was willing to work together with him to open an MMA martial arts club. 𝐓𝐡𝐢 then gave a wad of money and told 𝐓𝐡𝐢 that business in the sports sector was going up, and if they invested in it, there would be big profits. 𝐡𝐢's job was just to gather the children and train them. Regarding capital, you take care of everything, because 𝐓𝐢 needed money. He agreed to it. The next morning, when we was taking care of paying employees' salary, 𝐓𝐡𝐢 came with the prospective students, according to 𝐡𝐢's request, and when he saw all of them, he was pessimistic. But then he got an idea. Later that day, 𝐓𝐢 and 𝐓𝐡𝐢 pretended to send sand to catch the little robbers from yesterday. After successfully catching 8 of them, even though his aim was business, he still treated them well. When everyone was having meals, 𝐓𝐢 threatened that if they didn't want to be reported to the police, they had to be willing to be his students instead of being a robber. It was better for them to practice martial arts. They, without a single complaint, obeyed. Amid the conversation, one of the children, May, who said that they never went to school so they couldn't read, and right if I fell silent, feeling sorry for them after hearing that. After that, he went to his office and remembered his past when he was still a prime MMA fighter. That night, the children stayed in the warehouse because this was the first time sleeping on a soft mattress. They hoped they could sleep here forever, and even though they realized they were just being used for business, they were still grateful. 1 week later, at dawn, after making sure everything was ready, I waited for 𝐓𝐡𝐢, but after waiting for hours, 𝐓𝐡𝐢 never showed up. When he called, it turned out that 𝐓𝐡𝐢 had been arrested by the police because of selling fake medicine in prison. When they met, when he asked him to take responsibility because no one would fund him if not him casually, 𝐓𝐡𝐢 said that all his money had been confiscated by the police. Instead of bothering, it's better to just disband the club and abandon the students who couldn't accept that. But he couldn't do anything about it. That night, after returning to the mine, 𝐓𝐢 announced that the club would be disbanded. The children were shocked. One of the children, Sumo, begged to be allowed to stay and learn martial arts there. He promised that he would be a good kid, but with a heavy heart. He was forced to kick them all away not long after. When he was cleaning up, another mining owner came to inform him that a group of kids had robbed him. At first, we pretended not to know them, but it turned out that when they were robbing, they admitted that they were 𝐲𝐡𝐢 students. 𝐲𝐡𝐢 was beaten until he fainted, and as compensation, his stock of sand was taken by force. Because of that incident, we took the children home to meet their parents the very next day. When they arrived, 𝐓𝐢, who assumed, continued walking while 𝐓𝐡𝐢 and the other children were waiting in the truck when they got home. I was sorry to see Sumo's older sister's condition was paralyzed when the girl found out that her brother had caused a problem. She apologized to 𝐲𝐢. She told him that they had been neglected by their parents and lived in poverty for a very long time. She promised that she would try to compensate 𝐲𝐢's losses, but because he couldn't bear it, he instead gave money and then left. The next morning of the mining site, who gathered the children, he showed the letter of agreement, telling them that they could stay and eat for free there under one condition, that they should never rob again and practice martial arts with him without thinking twice. And children agreed to it. In the afternoon, Joy went to the bar to meet his old friend. He invited his friend to work together to make a mini fighting show his bar to attract people. It would be a pretend fight, so no one would get hurt. If I was sure that his students would be able to entertain the customers upon hearing his brilliant idea, his friend agreed. The next day, after training, 𝐲𝐢 showed the children video recordings of many athlete fights while explaining that later they would fight like that in front of people. But the difference was that the fight was just a pretend fight, and told Sumo and 𝐓𝐢 to pretend to fight as an example. But because the acting was so bad to make them understand 𝐓𝐡𝐢 and told them to mimic 𝐓𝐡𝐢's expression when he was in pain, he told them that acting was not just about the act, but also expression. A few days later, after practicing, we took the children to the bar. That night, 𝐓𝐢, a sumo, were the ones who would perform to entertain the audience. But because their fight clearly looked fake, the whole audience was disappointed, put it and shouted, telling the two to fight for real. and that worked out. They managed to entertain the people there. After the performance, while 𝐓𝐡𝐢 and May, who were being messaged, Sumo confided in who really wanted to be a real athlete like him. And if one day he became a champion and could travel around the world, he wanted to take his sister to go wherever she wanted. He then asked if one day his dream could come true, but who just remained silent the next day, so the children could train enthusiastically. Who bought them new equipment day after day, practice after practice, and show after show continued until one day, because his martial arts gym had become more and more famous. We got an offer to hold a match at a famous bar in the city. We accepted it without thinking twice. But one night when Mahi with Sumo were fighting, thugs came in, disturbed the fight, telling them that they already knew that the fight was just a pretend. But because Mahu and Sumo fought back, they were beaten up. Meanwhile, when he got the news, he rushed to help them, but they were cornered. Fortunately, Phong appeared on time, diverting our attention. The three of them were able to escape, but Phong and the thugs were arrested by the police the next day, who came to visit Phong in the prison. He apologized and promised that he would immediately take care of the documents for Fan's release. He also said that because the lie had been exposed, his business was closed. Phong, who was worried about the fate of the children, suggested we train them to become real athletes. Mature Sumo seemed to have talent, and he was sure that one of them could succeed. Hearing that he thought about it, the next day, we decided to visit his mother. Her mother was so senile that she didn't even recognize him anymore when they met, whose chest suddenly felt sore. He remembered the day his career was ruined 10 years ago after he won a competition. He was caught taking doping and was forced to be disqualified. His mother continued to beg and asked the committee to do a retest as she was sure that her son had not cheated. Unfortunately, the decision could not be contested. We blamed his coach and then beat him severely. As a result of this incident, he was imprisoned. After remembering his sins, he cried in regret and apologized to his mother to make amends for his mistake. He decided to dedicate the rest of his life to training children to become professional athletes. 10 years later, at the airport, who came to pick up Mahu and Sumo, the Edge has taken part in the national level MMR championship. On the way home, he told a long story about all the matches until they qualified for the preliminary round. Hearing that story, I was proud. When they arrived at the club, we were surprised by so many poor people asking for the children to be trained in his gym. He was happy to accept them even though the gym was famous because most of the students came from poor people. He didn't charge them at all. Food and accommodation were free, not only to train them in martial arts, but he also hired tutors so that the children could study. After celebrating Mahu some success in the preliminary round, Hoi went to a private school when he met the principal. He begged the school to accept poor children to be able to study there, but the principal refused. If they wanted to go to school here, at least we had to pay for the registration fee. We felt later that night we returned to the gym. He saw Sumo. So practicing, he approached Sumo, told him that he was sure he would make it to the final and be the champion. You'd be able to bring a gold medal. He was also grateful because thanks to Hui, his life had changed. We was touched to hear that he then invited Sumo to a sparring a few days later, when the preliminary round was about to start. I received news that a video recording of Mahu and Sumo's performance when they were children went viral on the internet. Both had to be temporarily removed from the list of participants. When we met with the chairman of the committee begged for his students to be allowed to compete due to high public protests, the chairman was forced to refuse. He gave 𝐓𝐡𝐢 a business card for another gym and then suggested that the only way to be able to take part in the championship was for Mahu and Sumo to change gyms. News about the case of 𝐓𝐡𝐢 exploiting minors became increasingly viral until finally the police forced him to close his gym during the investigation period. Who could only surrender? A few days passed, and because he had no other choice. So that make you assume you could take part in the championship that they knowing he met the owner of another gym. The owner of the gym promised that he would train Mahu and Sumo wholeheartedly. After negotiations, we agreed to hand over his two best students whom you train hard. That night we took the kids out for a meal. When the kids said that whomever gym was closed, whatever happened, it would stay by his side because he was like a father to them. But in the middle of the conversation, who suddenly told them that he had signed a contract to transfer Mahu as Sumo to another gym. Meanwhile, for the other children, they were free to go home. Upon hearing that, Mahu protested for their good sake. Chui, with a heavy heart, said that the club was disbanded. While holding back sadness, he kicked the children away and told them not to appear in front of him again. A year later, Hawaiian opened a new business. From the proceeds of his business, he partly donated to the education of underprivileged children, especially the poor children that he once trained. That morning thing told him that journalists were looking for him and kept asking for time to interview him about the case from a year ago. But he refused to meet them in the afternoon, who stopped by the house of Shu's sister. thanks to for his help, she could live a more decent life. She told him that Sumo often sent letters. When we read them, he was happy that his former student had become a successful athlete. But when he saw that all the stands were exactly the same, he realized that Sumo was lying because he was curious. He went to the mail center's address to meet Sumo. In the middle of the trip, he accidentally hit a car that was stopped by a robber. And when he looked at the robber, he was shocked to find that it was Mahu. After we managed to chase him, Mayhew explained that he was forced to do this since we left him in Sumo. They had no future anymore. They lost their father figure for the second time. Sumo was injured in the knee so badly he couldn't walk. To treat him, you had no other choice but to rob people. Hearing my story, I was disappointed and felt guilty. The next day, when he visited and saw Sumo's condition, who could only lie on the bed, he could only hold his sadness. But on the other hand, Sumo couldn't hold back his tears. Quit told him that Mo, who was arrested by the police and imprisoned while crying, Sumo told him everything. When he joined the gym, he was forced by the club owner to take doping. But because he refused, he was beaten and kicked until his knee was seriously injured. Upon hearing the story of Choi, who didn't accept it, immediately left to me, the gym owner. When he arrived, he immediately attacked the man. But because he was alone, he was easily stopped by the other fighters there. The gym owner said that Mahu and Sumo were under contract with him, so I had no right to interfere. And if he wanted to take them, he had to pay a fine. Before kicking him out, the man stepped on his shoulder until it broke, just like what he did to Sumo. The next week, we decided to accept an invitation for a TV interview. In the interview, the audience called him names. The presenter then asked, what was Huey's real purpose in accommodating and training children from the issues circulating? The public thought that Huawei had exploited and deceived children for personal gain. I answered that he had indeed deceived them. But you see them to have a better future, deceive them into stopping, stealing, and deceive them so they could become champions and win gold medals. People never cared about poor children. Poor children were considered trash to society. Never mind helping so they can go to school. Nobody even wanted to care about them. Hearing those words, the entire audience fell silent, contemplating. Meanwhile, at the hospital before undergoing surgery, Shu Mu Feng and his sister watched Huey's interview. Su Mu cried to hear Huey's statement. Several months passed. After recovering from surgery, Sumo came to visit Mayhew in prison. Seeing that his brother could walk again, Mahu was happy. Sumo told him that thanks to Hu's interview, which went viral, the public began supporting and helping free their contract with the gym. Even the actions of the club owner, who had been forcing his fighters to use doping, were also discovered, and the club was disbanded. They were completely free and could go back together with Hui like before. While crying May, you asked Sumo to prove to me that he could become a champion. 2 years later, after going through matches and winning them, Sumo became a famous MLB fighter. That day, he challenged the world champion from Brazil. Hui and Sumo's sister were also present to watch. The first round began shortly after due to being repeatedly. Sumo was cornered. Lucky the bell rang. He was saved from KO. In another place, Fong watched the match on TV while in prison. Mayhew listened to it on the radio. They were worried whether Sumo could turn things around against the world champion. Soon the second round bell rang. Sumo was cornered. When he wanted to give up, he remembered the moments where we trained him to this point with 30 seconds remaining before the round ended. Sumo managed to escape from the opponent's lock, and with all his might he fought back the opponent until he managed to knock him out. Sumo managed to win. The TKO from a distance will look very proud. This poor street kid who previously had no future had become the world champion. He then went out of the building to enjoy a cigar.